Hey gang, welcome back to Jade's Garage. Today's video is part 3 in this 3-part video series, at least I hope it ends up being 3 parts, of me putting in an aluminum radiator in a 68 Mustang known as Jade. Now there's a lot of other videos on this car, and this car was in driving condition, but I had some problems with it getting hot. And this has always been a problem with these cars. So I am putting in this aluminum radiator from alloyworks. Now it is not a direct fit radiator. It's taken some work to make this happen, and I'm also changing it from the 68 style, which has both water necks on the passenger side, to having the upper water neck on the passenger side and the lower water neck on the driver's side, like a 1970 Mustang. So what that involves is swapping out parts, because you can't use the water pump unless you have a bypass type of long hose that comes back to the other side of the water pump from the bottom of the car. And I decided I'm not going to do that. I'm going to try to do it as if it was a 1970. So let me show you what I've accomplished so far and what the plan for today is. Let me start off by showing you the radiator that I'm going to put in the car. This was supplied to me by alloyworks. As you can see, the water neck on the upper side is on the passenger side, and the lower water neck is on the driver's side. It also has the 2 ports down below for the transmission cooler lines and a standard type of drain petcock. 2 electric fans and louvers punched into the shroud. Now in the first 2 videos I talked about removing the radiator. I showed how I did that, the test fitting that I did to make the radiator fit the car, and then I also in the next video went through installing the 1970 style water pump. I did have to go buy another hose to use here because this water neck that I'm using had a bigger fitting for some reason for the hose, and I could not get the hose to fit that I had on here. This water neck also allows me to put in the temperature sensor right there at the top. So I did that. I've installed the water pump, and part of doing that dealt with adjusting all of the brackets. I did not realize that this water pump 1970 was slightly taller than a 68, so that means that it offset the pulley, which puts the V-belts at an angle. So I had to adjust the brackets for the AC compressor and the alternator to get them to come out a little bit more, so that now I'm very, very close to having the V-belts on an even plane. Also in the first video I talked about and showed how I made this bracket. This is going to have 2 bolts going through it that mount down where the original radiator rubber pieces went. So there's existing holes down at the bottom there. I'm going to make use of those and mount that bracket. I'm also going to install some of this foam. This is 1/8 inch thick single sticky side foam, and I'm going to put a piece inside of there, a piece on the back side here, and 2 pieces at the bottom, and that's going to keep the radiator from vibrating around and chattering. I also want to point out that I am using the same radiator hose that I used previously. This is a Dayco C70543, and I had to change out to a 1970 style hose for the bottom. This is a Gates 20609. I also want to point out this hose was a bit long. Now whether that's intentional or whether it's something to do with this configuration, I don't know. But all of this extra hose here I cut off. And I did this in, as you can see, multiple pieces. So some of it came off of this end, and some of it came off of this end. This connects to the radiator side, and this was actually probably about that long, I believe. So I had to keep trimming it back so that the hose would fit in there without much of a bind. Now I will make a suggestion. Before you put everything in place, see if you can have some petroleum jelly. The reason for that is these hoses, when you try to put them onto a water neck, it's going to be a really tight fit. Doesn't really matter where you're working on it, it's going to be a snug fit. So take some petroleum jelly, put inside of this opening right here, and you can slip this onto the water neck a lot easier. The conflict with this setup is this water neck is very close to that fuel pump. So you have to get down get past the fuel pump, and in this case come underneath this fan belt. In my case, now it may be different on other vehicles because I have added this power steering from a Borgeson power steering kit, and that's why that pump is on this side. If you may have a different vehicle or another model, this belt may not even be a concern, but you have to get down behind that belt and then come back over and right about here connect to the radiator. Some other things I want to point out before I get too far into it. This kit did not come with this, I'll just say that. It comes with this relay setup and this temperature sensor that's going to go into the water neck. So that basically, from my understanding, creates the ground for the system to turn on. The relay will trigger and turn on the fans. The only problem I have with this, and I'm going to probably have to detail some of this as I go forward. There's a couple things going on with this, and I'll show that later. But the fans have these male connectors right here. As you can see, it's got a blue and a black wire. They don't supply the wiring connectors to go from this. I guess the thought was you can just cut these off and make your own or something. But I did some research and I found these wire kits. This is from JPM, and basically this will connect to that. Let me open up the package and I'll show you. So this is just a pairing of wires. These are designed to connect to each other, and basically you would cut these wires in the middle, somewhere up here, and then you have two ends that you can connect together and create your own connection. So this will fit this. I've already test fitted these. And now what I can do is cut off this end, and if I ever decide to take these out, I can disconnect here instead of disconnecting or cutting off my wires. These can stay in the car. So that's what I'm going to do to make this operate. But I'll do more on the wiring later on. Let's get this radiator in the car. So I want to talk about the relay kit that came with this radiator. This is what was sent by alloyworks. Basic relay, nothing fancy about it. This actually plugs into the wiring connection. If you look at this, you'll find on the bottom where the pins are, there are numbers. And those numbers represent these numbers that I've written up here on the cardboard. And it'll only plug in one way into this wiring connection. So really the wires are kind of arbitrary as to what color. You may get a different one that has different colors. But let me tell you what is going to happen with this setup. If you look at the numbers on the relay itself, you've got an 87 and a 30. The 30 is the red wire with the inline fuse. Okay, that is going to go to your battery. The 87 is blue, and that provides the power to the fans. So in this case, my blue wire is going to connect to the red wire on my pigtails that I bought. Again, I'm cutting these off here, so I will connect both those reds into this blue. The black wires are the grounds for the fans, so that'll take care of the fan side of things. So you got the blue and the red. Now what happens is the coolant switch goes to the black wire. Now that's going to create the ground circuit. And the white goes to a switched ignition power. You can hook this up directly to the battery, but if you do, and the temperature is hot enough, you can shut the car off and it's just going to keep running the fans, which really won't help you without circulation. So you really want to hook it to a switched ignition source. The confusion with this relay setup that they provided is this extra loop that's on this black wire. This, if you connect this to ground and you connect this ground to the coolant switch, in effect you've eliminated the function of the switch because you're always grounding to this. So what needs to happen? Basically cut this off. Just cut this off. Get rid of that loop. Take the whole thing and just cut it off. I'm just going to cut that off and eliminate that rest of that black wire. But what can I do with this piece? Well, I can connect it to the black wires on my pigtails that I bought. And that gives me a perfect place to put a ground screw somewhere in the car. So now what I can do, or what I will have to do, is add a length of wire to this to get me to the switch. As I mentioned before, the water temperature sensor that is inside of the water neck, this will connect to that, and that creates the ground loop to make everything function. So I hope that makes sense. If not, I don't know how else to explain it, but basically like I said here, blue goes to the fan power, white is switched ignition, red is battery power, and then black goes to the coolant switch. So let's talk about some wiring. Now I drew this up to demonstrate the layout for the solenoid. As you know, it has red, white, blue, and black wiring. The red is your power source, and that's going to connect to your battery, as you can see here. The white, that's basically your triggered power off of the ignition switch. That's what turns on the solenoid itself. And then the blue is going to go to the fans. So that powers the fans. And the black connects to the coolant switch, which was what's in the box, okay? So I was looking this over and I was really debating on this because this is a 40 amp solenoid. But if you look at the wiring, it's not that big. As an example, if you have these two fans are 80 watts divided by the voltage of 12, that's 6.66 amps per motor. Multiply that, you get 13.333 amps. Okay, come down here and you've got 12 gauge wiring is rated for 20 amps, 14 gauge is rated for 15 amps. This wiring is not as heavy as I think it is. You can see maybe see the difference in thicknesses there. So this kind of concerns me a little bit. I did go out and buy these solenoids. Now these are waterproof, these are each 30 amps. And you can see the wiring is heavier. So still the same function though. This is the trigger from the ignition, ground to the coolant switch, power from the battery, and blue to the fans. But these wires, the red and the blue are 12 gauge, and the white and black are 16 gauge. So that's much heavier. I think that these that came with the fan unit itself, they appear to be maybe 14 gauge. If you can compare the thicknesses of the wiring. So the blue to the blue, that's a lot thinner, where it is thinner. The white to the white as well is thinner. So my concern is that the solenoid that was provided may be at its close to its limit. If we're looking at 13.3 amps, you know, and this is say 15, that may be pushing the limit on it. So what I did, as I said, I mentioned, or I went out and bought some of these heavier solenoids, and these are waterproof as well. I also went and got some inline fuses, so I had this wiring separately. I had to order this separate. What I plan to do is use two solenoids. I will have a white trigger switch. As you can see, this is a smaller diameter, so it's just a power from the keyed ignition. And I have some 16 gauge which matches that size. So that's going to come off the ignition. And then what I also plan to add is some black, which will be a secondary switch. So there will be coming off of the solenoid to the coolant switch. I'm also going to put in line with that, or connect with that, a toggle switch that's going to be connected to ground. So if I want to, let's say I turn on the AC, I can flip the toggle switch and automatically turn the fans on. and that way I'm protected, or at least I have some airflow there guaranteed. So I'm going to try to get all this wired up. Again, I'm going to use 2 solenoids instead of 1, and I have to, wire the fuses in line, get all that connected. And I was debating on where I was going to put these. There are 2 holes existing right here on the shock tower, and it may not be the most appealing to have these solenoids there, but they'll fit. And by doing that, I kind of eliminate some of the length of wire that I would have to add. I was looking at different locations, like I had thought about connecting them to the shroud itself right here. Put one there, one down at the bottom, but the problem is these leads are so short that I would have to do a double splice to get the fuses connected. So I'm going to run it off of the shock tower and go from there. At this point, I have the pigtails for the fan wired. I have my blue connectors on. I have not connected the power wires just yet because I don't know what length I'm going to need. I have a single ground that will be bolted somewhere. And on the solenoids, I have the 2 red leads fused. Those will be connected to the power source. The blue leads have red lines connected to them. Those will connect to the red lines on, or red leads on the pigtails. And then the white is again the power source from the key. So I have a long spool of that. I'll cut that off as needed. And then this ground coming from the solenoids again is on a long spool. That will connect to the coolant switch, but also to the toggle switch that I mentioned earlier. So I'm not going to be able to really film installing everything here, but I'll show you what it looks like once everything's in. Alright, so let me show you where I'm at this point. I have the solenoids mounted to the shock tower. I have everything wired, as you could see in the time lapse. I put everything together. I do have the power on the positive post on the solenoid. I may have to do something different with that later. I don't like having all of these right where they're at. I may have to create a junction block or something to get those off of that and just have them hidden kind of away, or hidden away a little bit. I do have the 2 ground wires connected to the switch. So one runs to the solenoids and will activate whenever the sensor reaches a certain temperature. It'll kick them on. And the other wire, I've run it, it's come underneath along with the hot ignition wire. They're currently underneath here, and I've gotten as far as getting them to this location. Now, the plan is, of course, that I will connect a ground toggle switch to this wire. I'll get that inside the car and take care of that later. And then I also need to get a triggered or an ignition switch power to this. However, I want to show you that this system works. Oh, also, let me just kind of show you that I've zip tied the wiring from the fans up here to the one of the legs on the fan shroud, let's say, for the electric fan. So they're zip tied there and zip tied over here as well, so they're away from the pulley and stuff. But what I want to show you is that this thing works, and I'm going to do that by just connecting the ground wire and the positive wire to the battery, and the fans will operate. So at this point, simulating power from the key switch onto the solenoids. I can take the ground wire, simulating the toggle switch. So like I said, I wanted to wrap up this video. This has taken a little bit longer than I anticipated, but I had other things that I was working on and trying to get done as well. So hopefully you found some good information in this and it can help you with your project, or if you're trying to make a decision on whether you want to use one of these kits from alloyworks. I also want to point out, Christmas is coming. And if you're watching my videos, you know that I wear these hats all the time, and I have various other things that I wear. I'm going to be doing a giveaway video, and I'll probably give away, I don't know, 5 hats. I figure that's a good number. And that'll be in anticipation for Christmas. So stay tuned for that, and make sure you participate in the drawing so that you can maybe end up with one. But anyway, I want to thank you for watching, thank you for subscribing, and I especially want to thank my patrons who keep supporting me through all these videos, and that is very beneficial for me. Helps keep me making videos and helps out you by also being able to show you these videos. So little applaud for them as well. Now with that said, I do plan to do a follow-up video with the car running so I can show temperatures in various locations on the radiator and show the function of the fans. Hopefully everything works as it's supposed to, but I'm just not going to be able to do that in this particular video. But look forward to sharing that with you soon. But that'll be all for now. And until next time, take care of yourselves. See ya.